bit out of. Lizzie Robinson Jenkins is a Rosewood descendant. Her aunt, Mahulda Gussie Brown Carrier, and I apologize if I did not pronounce that correctly, was the school teacher for the town and lived to tell her recollection of the horrific events that transpired there. Miss Jenkins has spent more than 25 years researching and preserving the history of Rosewood. Please introduce and totally welcome Lizzie Jenkins, our speaker today.
Thank you very much, Miss Amy, for that introduction. I was going to speak in reference to Black Lives Matter. However, you covered it very well, but I want you all to know that the Real Rosewood Foundation stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement. And as she said, it's something that we need to keep alive. And I know I'm going to be speaking of our Rosewood, which is part of my family's history. I grew up, I am Lizzie Jenkins, or Lizzie Robinson Jenkins. I grew up in a home with few books in Archer, okay? But lots of oral stories. My mom was a storyteller. However, all of the stories that she has told me, Rosewood was my favorite story that she bequeathed to me and told me to make sure I research, authenticate, and tell the story accurately. I was not to attack or blame or accuse anyone for what happened yesterday or yesteryear. And I think I do that quite well. I tell the facts and I let you decide. And if you want to criticize, at the very end of the story of this presentation, you may criticize or ask questions or agree to disagree. However, this is my story and I try to tell it with dignity. As bad as horrific as the story was, my mom managed to tell it with much honor, dignity, and grace, because she was seeking peace and healing for her sister who encountered the agony of defeat during the Rosewood insurrection. And I know you know where I got that word from. I was told never, as I just said, to accuse anyone. And I don't do that because I know you are not responsible for what happened. And I'm not responsible, but it's history. And history is who we are. Without history, we're nothing. I want us to learn from what happened yesteryear, to take what happened and make sure it does not repeat. And I hope you are in agreement with me. But I am assuming that you all have studied up on Rosewood and you have read about it and you know the real history of it and why it was, why it happened. It happened in January 1, 1923. And it started in Sumner. Sumner is approximately 3 miles from Rosewood. Sumner had a sawmill, and it generated people from out of town to come there to work because the pay was good. It was much better than the pay that was in Rosewood. And at one time, Rosewood was a booming community. However, when they used up all of the timber and the cypress wherein they were making pencils, the town more or less died down, and approximately 65 people were left there because most of the people had moved to Sumner. And as I said, Sumner was now the booming town. And that's where the people moved. Even some of the Black people moved from Rosewood to the quarter homes in Sumner and lived there and worked there with James Taylor, who was the husband of Fannie Taylor. And James Taylor was the foreman of the sawmill. on one, and James Taylor was the foreman, and he had to report to work at 4 a.m. to start the machines and light the whatever need to be lit. Okay. And there were a group of men that went to work 4 a.m. with him. And each morning he would return home approximately around 6 a.m. for breakfast. But on this particular morning, January 1, 1923, because Fannie Taylor was having an affair with her white lover, she had agreed, or she wanted to call off a breakup or discontinue the relationship. However, her lover did not want to call it quits. Therefore, a fight ensued. She was left black, bruised, okay? So she knew her husband was coming home for breakfast. She had to tell him what happened. And she lied, because when he got there, he saw that she had been in a fight. He wanted to know what happened. She said, I was assaulted by a black man. That black man was my uncle, okay, that she accused. He was furious. Just to think, just the idea of a black man attacking his wife sent him into another January 6th rage. January 6th, 2021 rage. So he he telegraphed Gainesville, the law officers and the people in Gainesville. And the reason he went straight to Gainesville, because December 31, 1922, and you can look this up in the paper, Gainesville had hosted the Southeastern KKK rally. So the hate and the was still in town. So when they heard about it in Gainesville, of course they came to Sumner/Rosewood to help their fellow man catch a black man who had attacked a white woman. And the newspaper from 1923 quoted it that approximately or between 300 to 500 people came to Sumner/Rosewood and joined in this horrific attack on the black community. When they got to town, James Taylor, Fannie Taylor's husband, had already called for backup. He called the prison, which was nearby, for dogs. Please send the dogs. The dogs were there waiting. So when the gang got there, the mob, the KKK mob or the Jim Crow mob got to town, of course they were going to help search for this black man, supposedly, who had been there and gone to Rosewood. So the dogs, of course, were brought in, as I said, and they tracked a man, or they tracked someone from Sumner to Rosewood. However, it was her white lover. And he went straight to my uncle's house. Why did he go there? Because he knew him. Well, how did he know him? They were both Masonics. They were Masons, not of the same lodge, but they were Masons. And they were not cordial to each other. But you know, and I know, if you are a Masonic, a member of the same lodge, you are supposed to help each other out. So he went to my uncle's house early morning, January 1, knocked on the door. Aaron recognized the knock, the Masonic knock, jumped out of bed. That was my uncle's name. Jumped out of bed, ran to the door. Who is it? Who is it? And was devastated when he saw this white face. However, he listened to his story. And whatever the story was, it meant he needed to get out of town. He never would tell my aunt, because she was in bed too, and she jumped forward too, because it was early morning, 6:00. She knew that knock also, maybe 6:30. So he came back to the room, put on clothes. She said, what happened? What happened? He never told her. He mumbled. He went back out the door, went next door. His cousin lived next door, Sam Carter. He asked Sam Carter, hey, we need to get this man out of town because he's being hunted down. They took him to Gulf Hammock, which is approximately 6 miles. So they put him on the wagon. Didn't put him. He got in the wagon with them. They took him to Gulf Hammock. Now, why Gulf Hammock? Because he was from Gulf Hammock. He rode in to work in Sumner at the sawmill each morning with his friend. They carpool. His friend went to work at 4 a.m. So her lover had a couple of hours to hang around, to hang out. So he chose to hang out with her. That's the story. So when they dropped him off in Gulf Hammock, he was free. I mean, he didn't have anything to worry about. Then they had to return home to Rosewood, knowing or believing that a mob was coming and a mob was forming. So they came back to Rosewood, and sure enough, and I'm going to fast forward because the story is absolutely too long, and just give you the highlights of what happened. They came back to Rosewood, and they saw that the mob was building, was growing. So Aaron and Sam Carter went home. They lived next door to each other. Sam Carter got his wife, and they went to Aunt Sarah's house. Aunt Sarah was Sylvester Carrier's mother. Sylvester Carrier was the gun-toting Black man that lived in Rosewood. Okay, and when I say gun-toting, he did not like James Taylor, Fannie Taylor's husband. In fact, he hated James Taylor, and James Taylor hated him. So no love lost. So anyway, later on that afternoon, the mob that came to Sumner followed the dog trail, the scent, that where the dogs took them, went to Aaron's house. No one was at home, because when they came back from Gulf Hammock, they gathered their wives, their family, and took them to Aunt Sarah's house, because Aunt Sarah was the pillar of the community, and everybody gathered there and gossiped or talked and planned. They knew something was going on, but the men did not tell them what exactly was going on, but they knew it was a safer place to be at her house. So when they came back to Aaron's house and didn't find anyone at home, they knew, the people that lived in Sumner knew that Aaron hung out with Sylvester Carrier. Went there, did not find Sylvester Carrier. However, Aaron was so afraid that when he went to Aunt Sarah's house, which was his aunt, he had to go to bed. He was so broken, so nervous. So when the mob came and looked for him at his house, didn't find him, they went back to Sumner, and of course they fired up moonshine, came back, shotguns later that night, went to Aunt Sarah's house, went in her house, found Aaron, got him out of bed, pulled him from under the covers, put ropes around his neck, and tied him behind a car and dragged him to Sumner for 3 miles, about 3 miles. How he lived through this, I don't know. But after they got him there, they wanted to know where he was and how he was involved, and he refused to tell them. So they started beating him, kicking him. Eventually, before dying, they thought, he said something about Sam Carter helped him. And that was good enough for them. They said, well, he is near dead. Let's finish the end off. However, the sheriff had been out trying to find someone, get someone to cooperate with him and help him bring a halt to the mob. He could not, but he was in time when they said, he is almost dead, let's finish the end off. And the sheriff said, no, don't shoot him. Throw his in my car and I'll take him to the woods and I'll finish him off. However, the sheriff was a Christian, had to have been. If he was not, he became a Christian instantly, put Aaron in the car, took him to Gainesville and put him in jail there, told the sheriff, his friend Ramsey, Sheriff Ramsey, you keep him here and you better not tell anybody he is here. Now that sheriff in Gainesville had to have been a Christian too, because he kept Aaron in Gainesville in jail for 6 months. Nobody knew he was there but the Black doctors, Dr. Ayers and Dr. Parker, because Sheriff Ramsey sent his jail. You know, back then they trust the convicts or whatever they call them in jail, the trustees. He sent the trustees to the doctor's houses and said, you all need to come because the sheriff said come and treat Aaron. And for 6 months they did that. And I'm not going to tell you right now how we found out that Aaron was there, but after 6 months he was let out. His wife had escaped and gone to Archer, which was her home, because she thought he was dead. And you know, the entire time he was in jail, he did not know if she was dead or alive. So my mom always told me, say, baby, when you tell that story about Rosewood, you need to sing a song. And I'm leaving a lot out because 29 years of research is a lot of work. But I want you to get just the understanding of what happened. And she said, baby, you need to tell the story and you need to sing a song, and Mama's going to write you a song. And you know what? My research has been very successful with white folks because when I go out and I talk, I tell the truth. So one day, and I'm just going, this is a side step outside of the box. I was speaking at a library in Gainesville and I was talking about John Wright, and I'll tell you about him later. And everything I was saying, I said, well, you know, John Wright was the store merchant. He and Mary Wright were the store merchants in Rosewood. And I said to the group, I said, if it had not been for the sheriff and John Wright, the store merchant and Mary Wright, people in Rosewood, they would have perished because it's one way in and one way out. If you go, you can't go out through Cedar Key because that's a peninsula rounded and is surrounded by the Gulf of Mexico. So they had to work extremely hard above and behind the backs of others to help get them out of town. And that is what the sheriff did. So, and I wanted to sing a song. So on night 2, they were not satisfied with what they had done on night 2. Let me back up. After the sheriff took Aaron to jail in Gainesville, he dropped him off and he came back as fast as he could in his little car, Model T or T model. He came back to Rosewood because he knew the state he left the mob in, that was not the end of them. They were going to go back, and he knew it, to Rosewood and look for Sam Carter and look for Sylvester Carrier and any other black man. So the sheriff came back from Gainesville, as I said, as fast as his little car would bring him. That was like 55 miles. And he went straight to Aunt Sarah's house where they had gotten Aaron from. Because he knew the women, he believed they were still at Aunt Sarah's house. And the women that were in the house, because the men had, as my mom said, had hit the woods, went out hiding because they knew they were really looking for the men. He came to Aunt Sarah's house, the sheriff did. They heard his car coming, and the women in there met him at the door and said, they got Gussie, which meant Gussie was Aaron's wife and my aunt, Mahulda Gussie. And they called her Gussie, Amy, because they could not pronounce her first name. So they said to him, they got Gussie. He jumped back in his car, the sheriff, he went straight to Sumner at the hangout where he knew they would be. And he jumped out of his car, he didn't see her, and he said to them, where is she? And he was angry, and they knew it. And they said, calm down, Bob. You know, Sheriff Bob Walker. Calm down, Bob. He said, where is she, goddammit? Oh, I'm so sorry. And she didn't hear them tell the sheriff where she was, so they must have pointed in her direction, she assumed, because they had taken her. They had come back to Aunt Sarah's house, gotten her out of bed, put a rope around her neck, and threw her in the car and drove her there, took her out and harassed her for hours in an effort to make her admit that her husband was not at home with her on the night it happened. So they continued to drill and grill her. Where was your husband last night? And whenever the night was. And she would tell the same story. He was at home with me, at home in bed, and because not relent, they got angry. And they said, this is the last time we are going to ask you. And they had pistols and guns to her head. Where was your husband, in an escalated voice, last night? And she escalated her voice. She was the only one little skinny school teacher. And she said to them, with the guns to her head, you will just have to kill me because my husband was at home with me all night long. And they said, let's rape the bee. And certainly they gang raped her. And they kept dragging her down in the woods. So that's what I meant. The sheriff came, he didn't see her because they had dragged her and torn off her gown and that kind of stuff. And he found her. Although my mom said, she said he had to pull his gun when he got to her. She was cold. And she told my mom that she thought there was a bug in her ear. It was a frozen tear because it was very cold, between 20 and 30 degrees that night. So he brought her back to Aunt Sarah's house. And of course, they cleaned her up. But anyway, the sheriff was still working, trying to find train conductors from Cedar Key to help him get the women and men, children out alive. But he couldn't find any help. And I was telling the same story I just told you, and a white girl stood up working on her law degree. And she said, Mrs. Jenkins? I said, yes. She said, John Wright, that's the store merchant, is my great uncle. And I said to her, and you better not leave here before we talk. And she smiled and everybody else laughed. Had I been accusing him or attacking him, she never would have come forward. And as a result of that, I was going to say, I have located several of the white family that tell me, Miss Jenkins, that's our history too. Rosewood is our history. And others have come forward. I have pictures, and all of this is in my book, my upcoming book. Hopefully I get it out this year. I'm just telling the truth. That's who I am. I came up in a principal home. My parents were great parents. They were farmers, 8th grade education, but a lot of common sense. And they taught me well. And my mother assigned this story to me, which is the worst thing she could have done. When I say worst, this is time consuming. I don't have a life. I have 3 Zoom meetings today. But somebody has to get the story out. And I am trying to tell it to the best of my ability. And I'm trying to tell it positively. And a lot has happened. I've gotten and I'm skipping everything right now because I know time is important. But as a result of my working hand in hand and being truthful and honest with history, with ugly history, with just bad history, people come to me and want to help. We are going to build, hopefully, a museum here in Archer on the 29 acres that my aunt and mom grew up on, the school teacher and my mother. And today I'm sitting on the property. I live here. We have a house here and I live here. I didn't grow up here. I grew up on our farm, the Robinson farm, wherein I moved out of the house a couple of 3 years ago when someone broke in the house. I just couldn't stay there anymore because they just raped our house. But anyway, I'm here. Congressman Ted Yoho, before he left in the House last year, he was in the House of Congress. He didn't write. He introduced a bill to make Rosewood a historical landmark. And he assigned his friends, his Republican friends, and he told me the Democrats who work up there, the senators and the Congress people, he told me to get in touch with them. And as we speak, I have. But 2 of the people, 2 of the senators he knew very well, he suggested and he informed them, you all have got to help keep this history alive. And I tell people, and people say, want to attack me because he is a Republican, I'm a Democrat. I let them know history is not political. It's about doing the right thing. And that's what I do. So we plan to build a museum. We plan to resurrect the town of Rosewood. It was approximately 15 or 17 shotgun houses. Okay, 1 bedroom, no electricity, and no what else? Toilets. I can't think of the name right now. No plumbing. Okay, so we plan to rebuild the town, and we want to make it a camp, like a campground. And we want to get a train here, okay, and maybe a short track. This is what we are going to do. We are going to leave a legacy. And I didn't tell you about the train conductors, but the sheriff just worked. My mom said he worked 96 hours straight in an effort to get the people out alive. But what people don't know, and doing my research, I found out that Sheriff Bob Walker relatives lived, my great grandfather lived in Cedar Key on lot 202, and somebody related to him, Harriet Walker, lived on lot 201 in Rosewood. He knew everybody. He felt obligated. Okay, he probably was a member of the KKK too, but he had principles. And that's when you respect other people, you respect yourself, and you put that aside to do what is right. And that's what they did. I appreciate that. And that's why I continue to work on Rosewood. I appreciate you all for inviting me to hear my story. And I know you have millions of questions, and I have millions of answers. So if you don't mind, I'll stop here, Amy,